The red moon rose slowly over the rocky hills of Jara, casting a strange glow on the cold stone village. Fires lit the path to the elders' circle, where voices shouted and echoed through the night. Lyri stood in the center, her arms wrapped tightly around her small son. His eyes were wide with fear, his thin body shaking in the wind. She held him close, but her own legs trembled too. The elders stood above her, sitting on large black stones, their long robes fluttering in the chill. One elder pointed a bony finger at her, his voice full of anger. "You have broken the oath, Lyri," he said. "You were promised to Warlord Hekron, and you denied him before all. I did what was right," she said, her voice soft but steady. "He is cruel. He hurt the others." "Silence," another elder shouted. "You brought shame to our blood. You spit on tradition. Your son is fatherless." A mistake. A cold wind blew through the crowd gathered around the circle. Some looked away, others whispered, but none stepped forward for her, not even her brother, who stood silently at the edge, arms crossed, eyes empty. Lyri looked up at the elders, her heart beating fast. "Please," she begged, "don't punish my son for my choice, the eldest of them all, okay?" A woman with silver skin and dark eyes raised her hand for silence. "You are banished," she said, her voice clear and final. "Your name will be forgotten. You will leave before the next sun touches the sky." Lyri fell to her knees, her arms tightening around her son. "Where will we go?" she whispered. The elder did not answer. No one did. When the crowd left, she remained alone, the firelight fading. Her son, Rel, toked up at her with tired eyes. "Are we going to die, Mama?" he asked. She kissed his forehead gently. "Not if I can help it," she said. "We walk tonight." The wind grew colder as they moved out of the village. Each step on the frozen path was painful. Her feet were bleeding, and Rel was too weak to walk, so she carried him in her arms. Behind them, the lights of the village faded, and ahead, only darkness waited. They had no food, no fire, just the thin clothes on their backs. The ground was sharp and frozen. The trees stood like tall ghosts, watching them in silence. Hours passed, and Lyri's legs began to shake. Her breath was short, and her arms ached from holding Rel. Then, just as she was about to fall, she saw something in the distance, a small flicker of light. She blinked, thinking it was a trick, but the light stayed, glowing faintly through the trees. With the last of her strength, she walked toward it. It was a cabin made of old wood and metal. Smoke came from the chimney, and warm yellow light poured from the window. She crept closer, holding Rel tightly. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was it a trap? A hunter's hut? She knocked weakly on the door, once, then twice. A moment later, the door opened with a creak. A tall figure stood in the doorway, holding a long metal stick. Lyri stepped back in fear, shielding Rel. The figure was human, old, with rough hands, a beard like silver wire, and eyes full of quiet fire. For a long second, he stared at her, then at the boy, then back at her. She dropped to her knees. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, "just warmth for my son. We'll leave after." The man didn't speak. He looked at the snow blowing behind her, at the bruises on her arms, at the boy's blue lips. Then, without a word, he stepped aside. Lyri crawled inside, clutching Rel. The heat wrapped around them like a blanket, and the smell of wood smoke filled her nose. The man closed the door behind them and placed his weapon against the wall. He moved slowly, bringing a blanket and placing it over Rel. Then he walked to the fire and stirred the pot hanging above the flames. Lyri watched him with wide eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping?" The man didn't turn around, but his voice was quiet and deep. "Because no one helped me," he said. Silence filled the small room, broken only by the crackle of fire and Rel's soft breathing. Lyri's head dropped, her body finally giving into sleep, but before her eyes closed, she whispered one last word. "Thank you." The human said nothing, but he looked at the two of them for a long time, and something deep in his heart, something long frozen, began to melt under the red moon outside. In a cabin at the edge of nowhere, a new story had quietly begun. Liari woke slowly, her body sore, the warmth around her almost too much after the freezing night. Her arms reached for Rel before her eyes even opened, but he was already curled beside her, covered in a heavy blanket, breathing softly. The wooden cabin smelled of smoke and something cooking, soft and rich. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw the human sitting at the far side of the room, stirring a pot above the fire. He hadn't noticed she was awake. His back was straight, movements slow but practiced, strong despite the age in his bones. Liari tried to sit up, but pain shot through her legs. She winced and leaned against the wall, making a small sound. The man turned at once. Not surprised, not angry, just watching her with calm eyes. "You're awake," he said simply, "Supple. Be ready soon." She nodded carefully, her mouth dry. "Thank you," she whispered. He brought a small wooden cup of warm water and handed it to her. She drank slowly, her hands shaking. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He just turned back to the fire. Rel woke next, blinking in confusion, then smiling wide when he realized. "He was warm, Mama," he said softly. "We're safe." The man looked over his shoulder again. "Boy can eat first," he said. "Then you." Liari helped Rel sit up, and the man brought a steaming bowl of thick soup. Rel stared at it, like it was treasure, then began to eat slowly, trying to be polite even though his hands trembled with hunger. The human poured another bowl for Liari and set it near her. She hesitated, then ate with quiet thanks. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the pop of wood in the fire. When they were finished, Liari looked at him, unsure if she should speak first. He sat down in a wooden chair, resting his elbows on his knees. "You got a name?" he asked, not unkindly. "Lier," she said. "And my son is Rel." He nodded slowly. "I'm Ellis." There was a pause, long and quiet, until she added, "We were banished." Ellis didn't move, but something in his face changed. Just a little. She looked down, ashamed. "My clan, they follow old laws. I didn't obey, so they cast us out. We walked for hours. I didn't know where we were going. Lucky you walked this way," Ellis muttered, rubbing his hands together. "This place is far from the roads." Liari looked around the cabin now. Really looked. It was old but strong, wood patched with metal, tools hanging neatly on the wall, shelves full of supplies. A home built by slow hands and time, there was. No sign of anyone else, no photos, no second bed. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. Ellis stared into the fire for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Used to be different," he said. Voice rough, but war takes things. Liari knew better than to ask more. She simply said, "I'm sorry." Ellis waved it off and stood, stretching his back. "You can stay a few nights," he said. "But you'll need to earn your keep." "I ain't running a shelter," Liari stood quickly, ignoring the pain. "I can help. I can clean, fix, gather wood, whatever you need." He looked at her and gave a slow nod. "We'll see." The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Liari swept the floors, cleaned dishes, stacked wood. She learned to use old human tools, cut vegetables, and stir heavy iron pots. Rel followed Ellis like a small shadow, asking questions in broken English, laughing whenever Ellis grunted an answer. At night, they sat near the fire, Ellis smoking something from a small pipe, Liari patching torn cloth or sharpening knives, Rel falling asleep in her lap. Sometimes, Ellis told short stories, things from long ago before the wars. Before the skyships fell, he never smiled much. But something in his eyes softened. Liari began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Something dangerous hope, but she didn't forget the cold, or the looks of the elders, or the way her brother turned away. She didn't forget the way her people hunted traitors and exiles. One night, as Ellis added logs to the fire, she asked, "Why did you help us?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the flames. Then he said, "Because once I didn't help someone who needed me." He didn't explain more, and she didn't ask again. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like something new was growing. Something small and real, and none of them knew yet, but trouble was already on its way. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind still howled through the trees like a wounded beast. The days passed slowly, and Liari began to notice the rhythm of Ellis's world quiet. Steady, without lies, each morning he woke before the sun and stepped out into the cold, carrying a rusted axe or a sack full of seeds. Liari would stay inside with Rel, helping him read the old earth books stacked in the corner. Their pages were torn, but the pictures made Rel smile. Sometimes Ellis came back with wild roots, sometimes with nothing. He never complained, never explained, he simply worked, ate, and rested. Liari tried to do more. She mended torn curtains, fixed the broken latch on the storage door, even cleaned the frost-bitten tools in the barn behind the cabin. Ellis noticed, but said little. Just gave a quiet nod now and then. One evening, after supper, Ellis opened a small tin box from the top shelf. Inside was a cracked old radio. Held together with wire and patience, he turned a small knob, and static filled the room. Rel jumped, then laughed. Pointing at it like it was magic, Liari leaned closer, confused. Ellis tapped the side of the radio and spoke softly. "No signal, not yet. You're trying to reach someone?" Liari asked. Ellis shrugged. "Been trying for years, just habit now." She watched the machine buzz and hiss, wondering what kind of hope stayed alive after so long. Later that night, when Ellis had gone to bed, Liari stood by the window, staring into the dark. The forest felt different now, not empty, but full of secrets. She whispered to herself, "Maybe we can stay." But deep down, something twisted inside her chest. A warning, a feeling she couldn't shake. The next morning, she stepped outside to hang blankets in the wind. And that's when she saw the footprints, 3 of them, large, wide, fresh in the snow. They led toward the tree line and disappeared. She dropped the blanket, heart racing. Rel came outside, giggling. "Is it snow monsters, Mama?" She smiled quickly to calm him, but inside, she was trembling. When Ellis returned from the woods, she pulled him aside and pointed at the marks. He stared at them, face hardening. "Not animals," he said. "Too straight, too clean. You think someone's looking for us?" She asked, her voice tight. "Maybe," he said, then added with a frown. "Or looking for me." That night, Ellis locked the cabin tighter than usual. He checked the rifles, lit fewer lamps, and listened longer to the wind. Liari put Rel to sleep, brushing his hair back gently, then sat near the fire, waiting. Finally, she asked, "Who would come for you after all this time?" Ellis didn't answer right away, just stared at the flames. Then he said, "I used to fight. A long time ago, I was a soldier, but I left it behind." Liari leaned in, and they didn't forget. "They never do," he said, voice low. "Same. With your people, I bet." She nodded slowly. "They will come, sooner or later. They don't like when someone breaks the rules." Rel stirred in his sleep, as if hearing their fears, even in dreams. The wind howled again, but this time it felt closer. Ellis stood, crossed to the window, and stared into the dark. "I don't know what's coming," he said, "but I won't let anyone take that boy, not while I breathe." Liari looked at him, surprised. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you, Ellis." He nodded without looking away from the window, fingers resting near the old rifle leaning against the wall, outside, in the cold woods beyond the cabin. Something moved in the shadows. Slow and careful, it had followed their scent for days, silent and waiting, and now it had found them. The morning came quiet, too quiet, even the birds had gone silent. As if the whole forest was holding its breath, Ellis stood at the tree line, staring at fresh prints in the snow. They were sharper now, clearer. Someone had been watching the cabin during the night. He didn't say much to Liari, but his eyes said enough. He moved with purpose, checking the traps, stacking wood closer to the door, sharpening the blade on his old axe until it glinted like ice. Liari kept Rel inside, teaching him how to fold blankets and count numbers from the old Earth books. Her mind wasn't on the lessons, though. She kept glancing out the window, waiting for something to appear between the trees. By evening, the sun began to set, and a pale orange glow touched the snow-covered roof. Ellis sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, his hands steady, but his face was harder than usual. "I think they're close," he said softly, not looking up. Liari nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's my clan?" "Could be," he said. "Could also be worse." That night, they took turns watching the door. Rel slept between them on a bed of furs, his small hand clutching Ellis's sleeve even in his sleep. Just before dawn, Ellis heard it snap. A low crunch in the snow. Not far, he rose without a sound, lifted his rifle, and walked to the front window. In the pale light, he saw them. 3 shadows at the edge of the trees. Tall, armored, and moving with slow care. They were not animals. And they were not hiding anymore. Ellis moved quickly, locking the door, bolting the shutters. Then he looked at Liari, his voice firm but calm. "It's them." She stood, panic rising. "What do we do?" "You hide," he said. "Take Rel to the cellar. Keep him quiet." "What about you?" she asked, already moving. "I'm not hiding," he said, loading the rifle with a click. "They'll expect fear, not a fight." Liari opened the trapdoor near the kitchen floor and helped Rel climb down. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Be brave, little star." Then she looked back at Ellis. "You're not doing this alone." Before he could argue, she grabbed the second rifle from the wall, the one she had helped him clean days ago. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady. Ellis raised one eyebrow. "You sure?" She nodded. "They took everything from me. They don't get to take this too." The first knock came loud and heavy, shaking the old wooden door. A voice followed, metallic and cold. "Surrender the female. She is property of the clan." Ellis replied without hesitation, "She's free here." Another pause. Then the voice said, "You will die for this human." Ellis grunted. "I was already dying. You just gave me a reason not to." The second knock was harder, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the door. Then silence. Liari stood near the back window, eyes locked on the forest, breath shallow. Ellis aimed his rifle at the door, counting the seconds in his head, and then it exploded inward. The first attacker stepped through, black armor shining, armed with a shock spear. Ellis fired. The blast hit the soldier square in the chest, sending him flying back into the snow. Another entered from the side. Breaking a shutter, Liari turned and shot. The blast catching the attacker in the shoulder, sparks flew, wood shattered, and smoke filled the room. Ellis moved fast, like a man 20 years younger, kicking over a table to make cover, reloading. In seconds, the third enemy came through the window, grabbing Liari by the arm. She screamed, twisting hard, but the soldier was strong, pulling her toward the broken frame. Ellis turned, shouted her name, and fired again. The shot burned through the side of the attacker's helmet, dropping him to the floor. Liari fell backward, coughing. her face pale but alive. Then all was still again. Smoke drifted out of the cabin. Like a thin ghost, the wind outside began to howl, covering the tracks in the snow. Ellis knelt beside Liari, checking her arm. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "No, just scared." He nodded once, then went to the cellar and opened the trapdoor. Rel looked up at him, eyes wide. "Is it over?" "For now," Ella said, lifting him into his arms. "But more may come." Liari stood in the ruined doorway, staring at the bodies in the snow. Her hands were still shaking. But there was something new in her face, anger and fire. "They'll keep sending more," she whispered. "They won't stop." Ellis looked at her, then at the cabin, broken but still standing. "Then we won't stop either," he said. The wind roared around them, but inside that broken home, something stronger. Then fear was starting to grow. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood. The broken furniture was scattered across the floor, and the snow at the doorway had turned red. Ellis sat near the fireplace, wrapping his injured shoulder with a strip of cloth. His jaw was clenched, but he didn't complain. Liari paced the room, her eyes darting from window to window. She hadn't slept, not since the attack. Not even for a second. Every sound outside made her flinch. Rel lay in the corner, wrapped in blankets, fast asleep. His small chest rose and fell slowly. Unaware of the storm growing around him, Ellis finally spoke, his voice low. "They'll send more, next time with better weapons." Liari stopped and looked at him, her fists clenched. "We should run." "Run where?" He asked. "There's nothing for miles, snow and ice, and more hunters." "Then we fight," she said, her voice trembling with fear, but not weakness. Ellis nodded slowly. "We don't have a choice." The next day, they buried the three attackers in the forest, not out of mercy, but to hide the evidence. Ellis dug the graves with steady hands, even though the cold made his fingers stiff. Liari stood watch, a loaded rifle hanging from her shoulder. She listened for movement, for the hum of a clan scout ship, for the sound of boots breaking snow, but the woods stayed silent. By nightfall, Ellis started reinforcing the cabin walls. With old scrap metal from the barn, Liari helped, hammering in nails and sealing the cracks. Her hands were bleeding by the end, but she didn't stop. Rel watched from the doorway, his small face serious. He no longer laughed, no longer asked questions. He just sat there quietly, holding a wooden spoon like it was a sword. On the third day, the sky turned gray and thick with clouds. Snow fell heavy, covering the world in white. Ellis lit only one lantern inside the cabin, trying to make the house seem empty from the outside, but Liari knew it wouldn't be enough. That night Ellis took out a long, flat box from under the floorboards. Liari had never seen it before. When he opened it, her eyes widened. Inside was a large energy rifle, old but clean. It glowed faintly with blue light. "This," Ellis said, "is from a war I never talk about." Liari looked at the weapon, then at him. "Why now?" "Because I got something to fight for," he said. "You and that boy." The silence between them was deep, not uncomfortable, but full of understanding. Suddenly, Rel pointed to the window. "Mama," he whispered. "Someone's out there, Liari." Ran to the window and looked through the small gap in the wood, in the dark forest. A flicker of movement passed between the trees. Not one, but many. She turned, her voice urgent. "They're here." Ellis moved fast, placing the rifle across the windowsill. Checking the charge, loading his revolver. "Get Rel to the crawl space," he ordered. "Keep him down." No matter what, Liari didn't argue. She grabbed her son and lifted the floor hatch. Hiding him inside, his small hands clung to hers, but she pulled away gently. "Stay quiet, little one," she whispered. "No matter what you hear." The door cracked just moments later. 3 attackers charged in clan soldiers in dark armor. Ellis fired the energy rifle, the recoil shaking the whole wall. One attacker flew back through the doorway, armor burning. Liari grabbed the second weapon and fired toward the left window. Glass shattering into the snow. The attacker outside screamed and dropped. But the third soldier jumped in through the rear window, grabbing Ellis and slamming him to the floor. Liari turned, shouted his name, and fired too late. Ellis rolled to the side, taking the hit to his ribs, then stabbed a blade into the attacker's neck. They both collapsed together. Gasping, Liari ran to him, pulling the armor off the dead soldier. Ellis groaned, but gave her a thumbs up, still breathing. He said with a grim smile, "Outside, more footsteps approached too many to count." Ellis sat up, gripping his side. "We can't hold much longer." Liari looked at the broken cabin, then at Rel's hiding place. Then something inside her changed. She grabbed one of the fallen soldier's grenades, turned the timer, and tossed it through the open door. A blast rocked the forest, sending smoke and snow into the air. Ellis blinked, surprised. "Didn't know you were that kind of fighter." "I wasn't," she said, breathing hard, "but I am now." The remaining enemies pulled back, retreating through the trees. The cabin was a mess. But they were alive. For now, they had one. Liari sat beside Ellis and took his hand in hers, both of them shaking, and in the silence that followed, Rel climbed out of hiding and sat between them, hugging both tightly. They didn't speak, because nothing needed to be said. They were no longer just survivors. They were a family, and they would fight for each other until the very end. The snow had stopped, but the silence outside was still thick and heavy. Ellis stood on the porch, staring at the smoke rising from the forest where the last attackers had retreated. His body ached, ribs bruised. One arm stiff, but his eyes were sharp. Liari came out behind him. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, her hands were raw and cracked. Dried blood at the corners of her fingernails. But she didn't complain. "We have a few days," Ellis said without turning. "Maybe less. They'll come back." She answered, "With more soldiers, better weapons. They're not after you anymore," he said, looking at her. "They're after what we represent." Liari nodded. "Freedom, back inside." Rel was building small towers out of empty cans, carefully stacking them without speaking. He wasn't the same boy who had arrived here. That boy had been quiet, scared, always hiding behind his mother. This one sat with his back straight and eyes alert. Ellis leaned against the wall, watching him. "He's tougher than he looks." Liari smiled faintly. He always was. The cabin was no longer a safe place. The roof had holes. 2 walls were scorched from plasma fire. The old radio on the shelf had taken a hit and now gave only silence. That night, they sat by the fire and planned. "We need more people," Liari said. "We can't survive this alone. I haven't seen another living soul in years." Ellis replied, "But maybe they're out there." "There are others like me," she said quietly. "Banished, forgotten, lost. Some must be hiding near the rivers, maybe beyond the northern cliffs." Ellis considered it for a long moment, then stood and pulled down an old map from the wall. Most of it was hand-drawn, the ink faded, trails barely visible. "We'll send a signal," he said, "a message. Not just for help, but for something more." Liari looked at him, confused. "Like what?" He smiled, the first real smile in days. "Hope." For 2 days, they worked non-stop, rebuilding the antenna on top of the cabin, stringing wires through snow and ash. Ellis repaired the radio using parts from broken weapons. Liari wrote the message in multiple languages, repeating it again and again until her voice cracked. "We are free," the message said. "If you want freedom, come north. Follow the red moon." By the 3rd night, the signal was strong. The words played on loop, soft and steady, carried by wind and silence across the cold world. That same night, someone knocked. Not a soldier, not an enemy. A quiet knock, uncertain, gentle. Ellis opened the door with his rifle ready, but lowered it slowly when he saw the figure outside. It was a woman, thin, wrapped in rags, holding a small child in one arm and a knife in the other. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her lips trembled, not with anger, but with hope. "I heard the voice," she whispered. "Is this place real?" Liari stepped beside Ellis and nodded. "It's real." The woman dropped the knife and collapsed to her knees, tears freezing on her cheeks. Ellis helped her inside. Giving her the last of the soup, Liari wrapped the child in warm cloth the next day. 3 more arrived, 2 old men and a young boy, limping and hungry, then a family of 4, carrying nothing but a broken cart, and then more within a week. The cabin was surrounded by tents, shelters made of cloth, metal sheets, and anything people could carry. Ellis looked around the growing camp, smoke rising from a dozen fires, children laughing for the first time in years. Liari stood beside him, arms crossed, face serious, but her eyes shone bright. "This was your idea," she said. "No," Ellis replied, watching Rel run with other children through the snow. "This was yours." That night, the red moon rose again. Large and clear above the hills, the people gathered around the central fire. And Liari stood before them, her voice steady. "This is not just a place," she said. "It's a beginning. We were thrown away, but we are not broken. We protect each other now, like family." Ellis placed a wooden sign at the edge of the path. It read only 2 words, carved deep with shaking hands. "Second chances." No one said much after that, because the fire spoke louder, the warmth, the laughter, the quiet tears. They had built something stronger than stone, and, for the first time in a long time, the wind didn't sound like a warning, it sounded like peace. The snow had melted into soft mud around the camp. The trees stood tall and green again, and for the first time in years, the wind carried the scent of growth instead of fear. The people who once came with hollow eyes now worked with steady hands. Children ran through the open field beyond the trees, chasing strange birds and laughing like war had never touched them. Ellis sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a small ship. His eyes followed Rel, who was helping other boys lift a pile of stones to build a new well. Liari walked out of the large cabin behind him, which was now a community hall. Her clothes were patched but clean, her head held high. She carried a basket of herbs and strange red fruit grown from her people's seeds, the ones they thought could never take root in human soil. "They're growing faster this season," she said, placing the basket near Ellis. "I didn't think they'd survive the frost." Ellis nodded. "They're like you," he said. Stubborn in the cold, she smiled, not just with her mouth, but with her whole face, but even in peace. Not everything stayed quiet. 3 riders arrived just after dusk, moving fast and low along the edge of the hills. Their armor wasn't clan-marked, but it was military, silent and gray. Ellis spotted them first and stood slowly, not grabbing a weapon, just watching. They stopped outside the village, raised their hands, and waited. Liari joined him, her expression guarded. One of the riders stepped forward, removed her helmet, and revealed silver-gray skin like Liari's butt, older and scarred. "I'm not here for war," the woman said. "I'm here because I heard the signal." Ellis raised an eyebrow. "You came for peace." The woman looked around, saw the children, the gardens, the way no one ran when strangers came, and nodded. "I came for a second chance," she said. Rel stepped forward, holding a wooden sword like it was real. His eyes narrowed at the strangers. Liari put a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered. "Let's listen." The riders were invited in, given food and warmth like everyone else who had arrived before. They sat by the fire and told their story. How they once served the old warlords. How they left after watching too many innocent ones fall that night. The leaders of the growing village met inside the old cabin, now full of maps, tools, and storage. Liari stood at the center, Ellis beside her. They listened to every voice, from every race, every exile, every fighter turned farmer. In the end, it was Rel who said what needed to be said. "We can't just hide here forever," he said. "There are others out there still running." Silence followed, not from disagreement, but from the weight of truth. Ellis stood slowly, his back straighter than it had been in years. "Then we go find them," he said. "We build more than a village. We build a path." In the weeks that followed, small teams left the village with supplies, medicine, and food, searching for outposts, hiding places, forgotten ruins where people still waited for hope. Some came back with stories, some with wounded, some never returned, but the camp grew stronger. A school was built, then a watchtower. Then roads connecting the fields. The garden doubled in size, powered by alien roots and human soil. Ellis became something more than just a farmer. He became a founder. A symbol, not because he asked for it, but because he earned it. Liara's voice was known across the region now. Her calm words broadcast every night on a rebuilt radio tower. "This is the clan of second chances." She would say, "If you hear this, you are not alone. Come north, follow the red moon," and every night, that red moon rose, glowing above the rebuilt roofs and quiet fields. A sign to all who watched the skies in silence. Not everyone made it. Not every traveler found the camp. But for those who did, they found something more than shelter. They found a place to begin again. And so the legend spread, not just of a brave alien girl and a stubborn old human, but of what they built together: a home, a family, and a future.